very happy to be here today with you all. And as some of you may know, about 5 months ago, I had a liver transplant.
Steve Jobs is dying. One day in May 2011, Bill Gates, his longtime rival, visits him at his house in Palo Alto, California. A final farewell between the two men who shaped the computer world and completely changed the way we live. The reconciliation between these two 20th century giants concludes a story which began 35 years ago.
He and I, in a sense, grew up together. We were within a year of the same age, and we were kind of naively optimistic and built big companies, and most of it as rivals, but we always retained a certain respect, communication, including even when he was sick. I got to go down and spend time with him.
Steve Jobs, the man of many lives, wonder kid, rebel, before becoming a sort of new age guru of high tech. Bill Gates, the richest man in the world, a relentless achiever, fueled by dreams of greatness. Two supernovas whose synergy and rivalry led to the creation of a binary system, two passionate men who were total opposites.
Were they friendly? I don't think they called each other and say, hey, it's my birthday, happy birthday. I don't think it was that kind of relationship.
And Microsoft's just, it's McDonald's.
The only thing they had in common was having dropped out of school to pursue their visionary dreams.
Though they never worked in the same company, they created an industry together. And we had a hippie and a nerd.
Gates and Jobs, the story of the mightiest duel that an industry has ever known, the epic battle between Mac and PC. Jobs, the hippie, and Gates, the geek, literally dictated the future of the computer. In the 70s, Steve Jobs and Bill Gates are still adolescents. Video games are just starting to appear. The world of the computer still consists of enormous machines, supercomputers that only the largest companies can afford. A market dominated by the American multinational IBM, better known as Big Blue. A native of Seattle and son of the well-off family, Bill Gates enjoys creating computer programs and software during his high school and university days with his friend Paul Allen.
Bill Gates and Paul Allen, they were at Harvard. And at a computer store or at the bookstore in Harvard Square, there was a magazine, Popular Electronics, January 1975, and it had a picture of the Altair on the cover. That was the gun that was fired that started the race for them.
The Altair, the dinosaur of personal computers. A rudimentary tool, a mix of toggle switches and flashing lights. It is reborn thanks to Bill Gates and Paul Allen. By creating a programming language for the Altair, called BASIC, they provide it with intelligence. It's revolutionary.
The languages thing was what they were passionate about. Bill Gates and Paul Allen's goal in 1975 was to dominate the languages business on personal computers. That's why they left Harvard.
Immediately afterwards, in April 1975, Gates and Allen start their company, Microsoft. The purpose is to sell BASIC, but above all to develop new software for future computers. Also in 1975, but this time in Palo Alto, California, another duo emerges, Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, two high school students who are fans of this new technology. For them, the Altair also marks the beginning of an epic journey.
Steve Wozniak, he looked at that Altair, and for him, this was not elegant. There were too many chips, the thing was too big, So immediately what Woz was doing in his head was saying, I can design a computer all on one board.
This would be the Apple I. Woz and Jobs are the first to succeed in putting all of the components that make a computer work onto a single board. Power supply, keyboard, and memory, all connected to a screen. The two friends have just invented the personal computer.
Making the Apple I was purely Woz's idea, and it was purely his design. But once he showed it to his good friend Steve Jobs, Steve is the marketing person, and he's thinking, we can make money.
But for now, the Apple I is being manufactured in the Jobs family garage.
I'm pretty much the only person who worked in the garage, at least on the Apple I. Steve Jobs was on the phone all the time. He was in the kitchen on the phone. I was in the garage testing Apple I boards.
They were excited. They thought, they were amazed that people were actually paying them. They were going to make money. For something that they designed, that was pretty special.
1 year after the founding of Microsoft, the Apple Computer Company is established in April 1976. Microsoft and Apple, the two pillars of the computer revolution.
They both had a belief that computers were not just important, but crucial. And yet they both had a very different way of going after it.
Jobs was coming from hardware, and Gates was coming at it from software. And so they came at it from two different directions, but they both were very strong-minded men who believed they were changing the world.
While Bill Gates continues to develop his BASIC, the Silicon Valley duo push ahead. Steve Wozniak develops the Apple II, while Steve Jobs looks for investors so that he can grow his young company.
Steve met Mike Markkula. And Mike Markkula was the guy with the money who liked what he saw and wrote the business plan and raised the money and incorporated Apple and hired the board of directors. And that's what really got Apple going.
Impressed by Steve Jobs, the California businessman Mike Markkula invests $250,000 in Apple, which expands and moves to Cupertino, where its headquarters are still located today.
How many calculators do you own?
2, maybe?
Right, and you have to use the automatic bank telling machines?
Sure.
So life is already seducing you into learning this stuff. And it's certainly not an 1984-ish vision at all. It's just going to be very gradual and very human and will seduce you into learning how to use it.
Jobs and Woz unveiled their new computer in the spring of 1977. At the computer fair in San Francisco, the Apple II is a smash hit.
The Apple II was a huge step. It was actually really the first usable personal computer. The Apple II I always thought it was magical because you could do almost anything you thought of if you were creative enough.
The Apple II, the first personal computer designed for the general public. The sales are phenomenal. It embodies the computer revolution, but it has a serious handicap, and the person who has the solution is Bill Gates.
Wozniak wrote a version of BASIC, but it wasn't completely up to date. There was a certain aspect of it that wasn't in there. So they began looking around for another version of BASIC that ran on the chip that the Apple II used. And Microsoft was a company that had it. So they got in touch with Bill Gates.
With BASIC, Microsoft supplies what the Apple II lacks. This is the first collaboration between Bill Gates and Steve Jobs. But at the end of the 70s, thanks to the success of Apple II, the spotlight is on Steve Jobs.
And then in 1980, they went public. So there were all these people who had stock that got really rich, and it was one of the first public companies in the personal computer space where people got rich. So then people started really paying attention.
What's it like to get rich?
It's very interesting. I was worth, $1 million. 1 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 million about over $1 million when I was 23, and over $10 million when I was 24, and over $100 million when I was 25. But especially at that point in my life, it was not the most important thing. The most important thing was the company, the people, the products we were making.
The products, also the obsession of Bill Gates, his vision of a world organized around software.
There's a lot of people who are forecasting that there'll be software stores just like there are record stores today, and that there'll be thousands and thousands of those. And I think I'd have to agree with that.
Well, Microsoft's first product was BASIC, and that was sold to Apple, and that was sold to Radio Shack and Commodore. They were all customers, so he already was doing business with sort of everybody that was trying to make personal computers.
He was the first person to really have the idea of a software company separately from a hardware company, and that maybe the software company was going to create more value than the hardware company.
Apple was the big elephant, Bill Gates was the mouse. So Bill Gates, being that position, he was a scheming, strategic guy, and he managed to work his company up, despite the fact that the giants of the personal computer business, Apple, and to some extent then IBM, were giants, and he had to get his software onto them in order to grow his company.
IBM, the computer hardware giant, soon entered the new personal computer market with its own PC. But computers are nothing without software. So IBM turns to the new reference in soft, Bill Gates, who seizes this unique opportunity and in 1980 signs a lucrative contract with Big Blue. His new computer operating system, MS-DOS, will run all IBM computers. MS-DOS is the backbone of the PC. It programs the computer so that it's easier to use.
Oh, well, the IBM deal was very important, obviously. I mean, having MS-DOS adopted by IBM changed a lot. And it certainly was a defining moment.
The smartest thing he did, maybe the smartest thing he ever did in the computer business, was that he got IBM to sign a deal that gave him a one-time payment, but allowed him to license it to other people who might clone IBM's PC. IBM did not really think anybody else was going to successfully clone their PC, so they didn't care.
It's Bill Gates' masterstroke. In addition to his contract with IBM, he retains the right to sell his computer program system to any of Big Blue's competitors. Bingo. With DOS, Gates sets the software standard for the entire PC industry.
I'd say within 6 months of him doing the IBM deal, everybody in Silicon Valley knew about Microsoft.
At the beginning of the 80s, both Steve Jobs and Bill Gates are still under 30. But they are the two key players in a rapidly expanding industry, a meteoric success story for two diametrically opposed personalities. Robert Cringely knew both men well. As a player in the computer revolution, he worked with Gates and Jobs starting in the late 70s. A former staff member of Apple, he switched to journalism and for more than 30 years has written about their rivalry.
With Bill, it was always about the money. With Steve, it was never about the money. I mean, money is nice, but it was never about the money. And so that made them black and white, up and down, hot and cold. They're very, very different people.
I hired Steve Jobs at Atari when I think he was 19, and he was very sure of himself and was quick to judge whether he thought you were smart or dumb, and if he thought you were dumb, he was very dismissive, even if you were his supervisor.
He was very good at knowing what he wanted, and he would just steamroll you into doing it. He was very, very persuasive. He was very good at recognizing when something was a good idea, when something was not a good idea.
He definitely relied on his instincts a lot. He relied on his gut. He talked about that all the time. And that's a certain type of spiritual dimension of being, you know, we had read books about, for instance, Gurdjieff, a famous Russian spiritual master. He was always talking about integration and wholeness, which means using all your faculties, which means using your third eye vision.
In the 70s, like many of the hippies of that time, Steve Jobs and his friend Daniel Kotka leave to go to India. The trip is a rite of passage, a search for spiritual wisdom.
We were looking for a wise man who had secrets of knowledge for us. Nothing really much happened to us. We did not find the guru we hoped we would find.
Steve would talk about all this spiritual stuff, and yet he could be a cruel person. You know, he had real troubles with intimacy. He couldn't allow himself to get close to people. I don't know why, you know? He loved the idea of spiritualism, but to live it was hard for him. And Bill is just geeky, you know? He's just a very nerdy guy. And as such, especially in his early years, he had problems communicating and being understood, and his family didn't know what to do with him. And he found his niche in business and technology and succeeding just on the basis of brain power.
Steve Jobs was a much better marketeer than Bill Gates was. But he was not really that technical. He was not a technical code writer. Bill Gates could write code and write good code.
Bill's just different. He led with the data and with the insight and the technology and the idea, where Steve led with, you know, what's it feel like? What's it look like, you know?
So, much more technical, much more marketing oriented.
We are one people, with one will, one resolve, one cause. Our enemies shall talk themselves to death, and we will bury them with their own conclusion. We shall prevail.
On January 24th, Apple Computer will introduce Macintosh.
In 1984, Jobs, the king of marketing, unleashes a groundbreaking advertising campaign. This is to promote his newest creation, the legendary Macintosh, a rampart against the Orwellian world of the giant IBM. After the Macintosh, nothing would ever be the same again. Simpler operating features, new design, the mouse appears, the graphics interface, the term used to designate those little windows that make life so much easier. These innovations, combined with software developed by Microsoft, like Excel and Word, make the Mac an overwhelming technological success. In fact, Bill Gates actually becomes a key figure in promoting the Mac.
2 years now. It's a great machine. It's a step forward in terms of the way it uses graphics and the speed, and this is a machine that a lot of people are going to be able to afford. That's a very, very useful machine.
There was a lot of collaboration on the Mac. Microsoft wrote some really great things for the Mac. You know, Excel came out first on the Mac.
The atmosphere was fine when he came. I remember the first couple times, remembered we were not competitors at all at that point. They were our allies at helping making the Macintosh happen. So we got along very well with them. They were similar to us in many ways.
Welcome to the Macintosh software dating game. Software CEOs, could I please ask you to introduce yourselves?
In a parody of the dating game hosted by Jobs, the contestants are actually the producers of the top software that contributed to the development of the Mac.
My name is Bill Gates. I'm chairman of Microsoft. And during 1984, Microsoft expects to get half of its revenues from Macintosh software.
Software magnate number 3, describe your ideal relationship with Apple.
Well, we'll be selling our software independently. So the key thing is that Apple gets a lot of consistent standard machines out there quickly.
Behind the smiling facade, Steve Jobs plays the king and treats Bill Gates like a vassal.
I spent the whole time, 2 days in Hawaii, with Bill being ignored. We were treated like some crappy little, it was like the most, it was horrible. We went for a walk, Bill and I went for a walk, all the way to Diamond Head and back on the beach, talking about how screwed we were. Like, we're just fucked. What are we gonna do? Lotus is gonna kill us. We are so screwed. Should we add word processing to Excel? We were just like so sad and angst-ridden because they were just blowing us off, right?
Bill Gates is bitter, but retains his foresight. The Mac's renowned graphics interface represents the future of personal computers. Without a qualm, he makes his move.
You know, I didn't trust Bill Gates, while we were working on the Macintosh. I was one of the first people at Apple to catch on to the fact that Microsoft was cloning the Macintosh. They were making their own version of the Macintosh operating system. I was always on the phone with a fellow who was in charge of Microsoft's application software. He was asking me questions about how the Macintosh system software worked that he didn't need to know to do what he was doing. So I kind of caught on to the idea, hey, they're copying the Mac. I told Steve, he wasn't worried about it at all.
Jobs is enraged when he learns that Microsoft is launching a new operating system, Windows.
There was a pretty strong disagreement when Windows came out, Then that was probably, of all of the things that ever happened between the two companies, that was the thing that upset Apple the most, and upset their people, and upset their lawyers, and certainly I'm sure upset Steve to some extent.
He was very upset, and his first reaction was, "Get Bill Gates down here tomorrow." And I thought, well, boy, you can't just call your competitor down. It might take a week or something, but I was amazed. Bill was there the very next day. I was very impressed by Bill Gates because there was an extremely angry Steve Jobs in the room. There were maybe 8 or 10 other Apple people, but just Bill from Microsoft. No entourage, no one there with angry Steve Jobs pouring down on him, just yelling at him. You betrayed us. How could you betray us? And Bill Gates, as cool as can be, said back, "Well, Steve, that's one way of looking at it. I have another way of looking at it."
He knew that the graphical user interface was the future of computing. And so if he wanted to remain, DOS was everything. DOS was huge, but he knew that if he didn't do Windows, he'd be out of business.
Bill Gates goes on the offensive. Jobs has already had a taste of this when licensing was renewed for BASIC, which equipped Apple II, still Cupertino's best-selling computer. It's the end of their collaboration. Now it's open warfare.
They had a negotiation, and Bill held out for an extremely high price that he didn't expect to get. And Steve felt trapped, and so he paid Bill what Bill asked. He overpaid for the contract extension on the Microsoft BASIC. They made so much money from that Apple contract that they devoted the excess money, the money they never expected to get, to creating an international business.
We always talk about companies playing chess. It's a chess game. Well, everybody else was playing chess. Bill was playing three-dimensional chess. He already had his move on another board already calculated from 3 moves on the previous board.
So if you look at the fact that Microsoft's more than half of Microsoft's business is now outside of America, that wouldn't have happened without Apple.
With Gates's increasing success, Jobs becomes even more of a megalomaniac. The world now revolves around him. He creates his own personality cult. The machine is his, and it literally recognizes him as its father.
I'd like to sit back and listen. So it is with considerable pride that I introduce a man who's been like a father to me, Steve Jobs.
Oh, I think if you talk to a lot of people on the Mac team, they will tell you it was the hardest they've ever worked in their life. Some of them will tell you it was, the happiest they've ever been in their life. But I think all of them will tell you that it is certainly one of the most intense and cherished experiences they will ever have in their life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they did.
So, it's some of those things you are not sustainable for some people.
The only way Steve knew how to run a company was to dominate everything, right? So if he didn't care about it, he didn't participate very much in it. But if he cared, he showed up at the meeting and he dominated the meeting. There was no other way around it. And everything about the topic was about Steve. Does Steve like this? When are we meeting with Steve? What's Steve think? We can't do anything until we meet with Steve, right? So for better or worse, he ran it in a completely controlling way, like a dictator. I mean, not like a democracy, not like a parliament, a dictator.
He believed in very small groups of people being pushed into greatness. And that was in part because he felt that he could only lead a handful of people at most. And so why not lead the best handful of people? So he was constantly trying to figure out who was the best. And, I was fired by Steve Jobs 3 times. And I was fired because I kept dropping out of the best, I was useful, but not that useful, Cringely, yeah, he's, fire him,
Hello, I'm John Sculley, president of Apple.
In 1983, Steve Jobs lures John Sculley away from Pepsi-Cola to become director of Apple. With this legendary phrase, you want to keep selling sugar water all your life? Or do you want to come with me and change the world? They start off as the perfect duo. But due to mediocre Mac sales, combined with Jobs' increasingly tyrannical character, the honeymoon is soon over.
It came down to eventually on the board a war between John Sculley and Steve Jobs. And in the end, because Steve Jobs had actually burned out so many people and created so much animosity and fear about himself, when the board came to vote, it was almost like the entire company voted that they would rather not have Steve Jobs around anymore.
Tell us about your departure from Apple.
Oh, it was very painful. I'm not even sure I want to talk about it. What can I say? I hired the wrong guy.
That was Sculley?
Yeah. And he destroyed everything I'd spent 10 years working for.
And a friend of mine was working at Apple that day, the day that Steve left. And they were all called out of their offices. And they all assembled down in the parking lot and sat on the curb and everything. And they were told one of our founder, Steve Jobs, is leaving the company. And nobody cared. They were like, good, we can get our work done with all this craziness and madness, and nobody cared.
For Steve Jobs, his eviction from Apple in 1985 feels like the tragic end of a love story. He has been robbed of his child. Soon afterward, using his own money, he creates a new company, Next. He's going to prove to everyone that he doesn't need Apple and will continue to revolutionize the world of computers. In his own mind, he was the sole genius behind Apple.
Maybe we can try it tomorrow or something, but we gotta run now. Thanks. Hey, thanks, Ryan. It's been a good day.
He needed friends. He needed people to help him. And Microsoft never did anything for Next, but they didn't oppose Next either. Bill didn't see Next as a factor. He didn't see Next as being, even having the potential for success. And so he didn't have to oppose it because he was fairly convinced that it would die by itself.
Mike Slade, one of Bill Gates' close collaborators, quit Microsoft to join Next. He has bitter memories of that experience.
Nobody bought them. We didn't have any volume. It's very simple. I was there begging them. We sold like 50,000 computers a year. Yeah, so why bother, right? It wasn't a good, it would have been a bad business decision. I mean, that simple.
First thing to look at in this product is the user interface. That's perhaps the most important thing about this product. This is the user interface of Windows 2.0, of Windows 386.
In the late 80s, after BASIC and DOS, Bill Gates wanted his new operating system, Windows, to become the standard system worldwide. Roland Hansen is the man who made Bill Gates the software industry's #1 media figure. And it's also to this marketing wizard that Windows, the graphics interface which would conquer the world, owes its name.
We realized that the opinion leading editors, they weren't calling these GUIs. None of these writers were calling them GUIs anymore. They were calling them all windowing systems because they were creating windows on the screen. And I said, holy crap. If these are all windowing systems, there's only one name we can be. We have to be Microsoft Windows.
Well, Windows 95 is so easy, even a talk show host can figure it out.
Windows was an affront to Jobs. Windows was an insult to Jobs.
Distant relative of the Mac, Windows, in just 10 years, is installed in almost all computers on the market, gaining planetary success. Everyone had to have it. With Windows 95, Gates and the PC definitively dethroned the Mac.
You make a grown man cry.
Windows was a way to move everything that he wanted to do forward. It was the foundation for everything that followed was Windows. That was one of the, when Windows 98 came out, that was a real revolution in the personal computer.
Windows, as you point out, is on 90% of the computers around the world. I mean, that today still is a phenomenal thing. And I don't see that changing anytime soon.
With the fantastic success of Windows 95, the geek from Seattle becomes the master of software and also the richest man in the world. Interviewed at the time by Robert Cringely, Steve Jobs expresses his contempt. In a few stinging words, he describes what caused the break between him and his old rival.
The only problem with Microsoft is they just have no taste. They have absolutely no taste. And what that means is, I don't mean that in a small way, I mean that in a big way. So I guess I am saddened, not by Microsoft's success. I have no problem with their success. They've earned their success, for the most part. I have a problem with the fact that they just make really third-rate products. Their products have no spirit to them.
Steve decided that that maybe he'd gone too far. So he called Bill up on the phone to apologize. And he said, Bill, you know, I saw the documentary. You know, I think maybe I shouldn't have said that publicly about Microsoft having no taste. And Bill said, well, thank you, Steve. You know, I really want to thank you for doing that. I think you went too far. And then Steve said, but it's true, you know. You have no taste. I mean, I shouldn't have said it publicly, but you know it's true. And Bill said, Steve, I may have no taste, but you said my whole company has no taste.
Embittered after the failure of Next and by the success of his rival Bill Gates, Jobs gets back on his feet by investing in Pixar, a computer-animated film company, which would become a goldmine. And as usual, he takes full credit for it.
So, Steve Jobs, you founded Pixar in 1986 when you bought Computers division of Lucasfilm. Did you know right then what was going to happen in this business?
Well, when I first met Ed Catmull, who ran the computer division of Lucasfilm and who I founded Pixar with, we did it together, Ed showed me what they were working on, and I was blown away. I mean, the graphics were, you know, years beyond anything I'd ever seen before. And he told me of his dream to make the first computer animated feature film. And I bought into that dream both sort of emotionally and financially, and we founded Pixar.
It's just wrong. You know, it's just wrong. That's part of the marketing story that he sold about himself, which is a good story, but it's just wrong. He's not Pixar. He's the money of Pixar. He's seductive, narcissistic, articulate. Something's just not right there. But whenever he wants to sell something, boy, does he do it, including himself.
In 1995, Toy Story is the first fully computer-animated film to be released. It becomes a blockbuster. Toy Story paves the way for Pixar's continued success worldwide.
And here's where Steve did something he was really good at. He grabbed the moment. And he took the company public based on nothing. We had basically no cash. We just had this movie, and the New York critics said it was going to be good. And he took, this is where he can sell something, right? He took that idea and sold it. Took Pixar public, became a billionaire overnight.
10 years after Jobs' departure, Apple still hasn't recovered. The company is on the verge of bankruptcy. One last card to play, the return of the Wonder Boy. Jobs takes over after buying back Next, his former failing company.
When he came back to Apple in 1996, he was a much more mature, much better. You know, he'd gone through a success of one company, the failure of another. So he had left his youthful craziness behind.
I think is one of the greatest turnarounds in the history of any industry in any country anywhere, to have a man come back to a company that was really going down very rapidly. They were in very bad shape, and then pull off the success that he did.
Something happened at Next that did change Steve. And what I believe it was that for the first time, it was his money. Next, it was his money he was losing. At Apple, it was Arthur Rock's money. You know, it was the public's money. It was Wall Street's money. It wasn't real money. But at Next, it was real money. It was his money that was going out. He could hear it, you know, leaving the building. And so he became, for the first time, began to care about profit and loss. He began to care about success, business success. He turned into a businessman, which he had never been before. He became a little more like Bill Gates.
A year after his return to Apple, Steve Jobs, back in command, develops a new plan of action, an occasion to make an amazing announcement to his adoring public.
And I'd like to announce one of our first partnerships today, a very, very meaningful one, and that is one with Microsoft. The discussions actually began because there were some patent disputes. And rather than, I know. Rather than repeating history, I'm extremely proud of both companies that they have resolved these differences in a very, very professional way. And I happen to have a special guest with me today via satellite downlink. And if we could get him up on the stage right now.
Good morning. Some of the most exciting work that I've done in my career.
I mean, Bill was genuinely happy when Steve came back. I think he recognized and felt that losing Apple as a successful company wouldn't be good for the industry. And I think that was that was when the relationship became closer, and that relationship stayed close.
Bill didn't do a favor for Steve. What Bill did was Microsoft had a successful business selling Macintosh applications. They were making a profit selling Macintosh applications. If Apple went out of business, the Mac software business at Microsoft would go out of business too. So he had a franchise to protect. Now, the fact that Steve Jobs was sort of groveling, made it better.
Bill Gates has another motive for coming to Steve Jobs' aid. The antitrust lawsuits pending against Microsoft over its 10-year Windows monopoly.
I'm here to share my story and answer questions about Microsoft and the PC industry. I hope that my testimony helps the court to resolve the issues in this case. That would be best for consumers.
Especially after the antitrust battle, really the day-to-day part of the company was really getting to be very hard on him. And that Microsoft was so big and so successful that it was a time that he could move on and go into something else.
As Gates steps aside, Jobs climbs to new heights. He adopts a new concept, the ad campaign, Think Different, a return to his original idea of simplicity.
The thing I most respect about Apple is they have found a way to make complex things simple. And that was the Think Different campaign. Think Different really got you to think. But then when you went and really explored Apple, it was different.
A brilliant marketing idea for the iMac, the new home computer that gives its users the feeling of being special, superior to the standardized world of the PC.
Then he said, okay, I could build Macintoshes forever, but that would be boring. So we're going to create the digital hub strategy, and we're going to create the iPod and the iPhone and the touch and a pad and everything, and they're going to connect through computers, but the computer's only the hub. People are going to carry their computers around. And that's the strategy from 97, 98, 99 when they came up with that. So then he could do what he did best, which was design brand new products.
So that's Steve Jobs, is that it's like, I am an alchemist. I am a magician, I am going to make this rabbit disappear, right? I'm not just going to make a rabbit, I'm going to make it disappear. I want to make the buttons move around, right? He liked things that were magic.
With the iWorld, Steve Jobs makes a new and unique contribution to our way of life. A new digital world with a single brand name that means innovation, design, and user-friendliness. Not always true of Microsoft products.
Bill, I think he was somewhat jealous of the great success of the iPod, and then iTunes, which went together, and that was a super successful thing that Steve did, and I think really a very brilliant thing to do, because it just started changing the way people viewed electronic devices.
The big change was the iPod. Steve saw or used an MP3 player. There were a lot of them around for 2 years before the iPod, but they were reserved for techies.
And so Apple created a better music player that was better because of its ease of use, and then they had to find a way to feed it. And in doing so, of course, they took the record companies the cleaners. They stole the music business from the record companies, because the record companies thought, oh, this is kind of interesting, but it's not going to mean anything. It's nothing. This is no big deal. Apple told the record companies that their goal in the first year was to sell 1 million music downloads. They sold 1 million music downloads in the first week. They sold 100 million in the first year. They sold $1 billion in the first 2 years. And the music business was changed forever. And the record company was saying, shit, where did that come from?
An iPod, a phone, and an internet communicator. An iPod, a phone. Are you getting it?
After the iPod, Apple reigned supreme over the world of the cell phone. The iPhone was the achievement that defined Steve Jobs as a modern visionary able to satisfy all the consumer's needs and desires. Confronted with cancer, perhaps he realizes that his days are numbered. No time to lose to make his mark in history.
Today, Apple is going to reinvent the phone.
Steve was now running a company that had gone off and done some really amazing things, and there was no longer this sort of, I'm in the shadow of Bill Gates, I'm not in the shadow of Microsoft. Apple's become this enormously successful company. Apple does more business, what I read, Apple does more business in iPhones than Microsoft does in total business. And they're the most valuable company in the world now.
Steve Jobs didn't change the world. Steve Jobs capitalized on a lot of things. Bill changed the world. Bill made software what it is today. If Bill hadn't created the standards, you know, MS-DOS, Windows, and was very dogmatic at making sure those standards took hold, we wouldn't have the technology we have today. And I'm talking globally. I'm not talking about the United States. Globally, he impacted the world in terms of what he did with software. He decided to do the same thing in philanthropy.
This is my last keynote, and it's the middle of this year in July that I'll move from being a full-time employee at Microsoft to working full-time at the foundation. It'll be the first time since I was 17 that I won't have my full-time Microsoft job. And I'm not really sure what that last day is going to be like. It could be a bit strange. What do you do on your last day? So I asked some friends to help me prepare for that.
Hey, it's Bill.
Bill Shatner of Star Trek?
No, the other Bill.
Bill Clinton?
Far from the realm of pop stars or political celebrities, Bill Gates now chooses to help alleviate suffering in the world. The foundation he heads with his wife Melinda makes this billionaire the most generous philanthropist in history. He keeps a vigilant eye on Microsoft, but today the dreams he nurtures are linked to humanitarian causes.
He's going to go down in history as the world's greatest philanthropist, no doubt about it. No one can come close, right? And so I think for anybody else, whether it was Steve Jobs or whoever, your view of Bill changed a little bit when you saw what a good job he was doing. I mean, it wasn't like some guy screwing around with rock stars and then occasionally showing up at a charity function. He's like really focused, and like achievable goals, wipe out malaria, no big deal, right? Things that are just amazing, right?
What individual in the history of money has devoted $20 billion to anything? No one but Bill Gates. So he's, plays to win, plays to win. Steve never got there. Steve never gave a penny to charity.
I once had a conversation with Steve much later after Bill Gates retired from Microsoft, and he was doing what I thought was great stuff at trying to eradicate diseases in third world and stuff. And I said, well, even though Bill Gates kind of wrecked the technology industry for a decade or two, you got to be proud of what he's doing now. And Steve looked at me and said, what do you mean, distributing his ill-gotten gains? He wasn't ready to give him all that much credit for that.
Hello, I'm a Mac. And I'm a PC.
Steve Jobs never missed a chance to insult his old enemy, like these Apple commercials that made PC users look ridiculous.
Why don't you say something positive about PC?
Okay, easy. PC, you are a wizard with numbers and you dress like a gentleman.
PC?
Well, Mac, I guess you are a little better at creative stuff. Well, thank you. Even though it's completely juvenile and a waste of time.
Maybe you should come in twice a week.
In 2007, the two giants come face to face for a last media event organized by Walt Mossberg. a top high-tech journalist. Past confrontation has at last given way to peaceful rivalry.
First I called Jobs, because I thought he'd be the hardest to get. And he said, if Bill does it, I will do it, but we have to keep it, I want to keep it on a high level. I don't want it just be a fight.
What's the greatest misunderstanding between you and your relationship and about each other? What would you say would be?
We've kept our marriage secret for over a decade now.
You are competitors in certain ways, which is the American way, right?
We watch the commercials.
And you get annoyed at each other from time to time.
You know what? I have to confess, I like PC Guy better.
Yeah, he's great.
I like him.
The art of those commercials is not to be mean, but it's actually for the guys to like each other.
Thanks.
PC Guy is great.
I like.
He's got a big heart.
His mother loves him.
His mother loves him.
I'm telling you.
Loves him.
I like PC Guy totally much better.
Wow.
I do. I don't know why. He's endearing. The other guy's
PC Guy's what makes it all work. Actually.
Yeah.
All right.
It's worth thinking about.
And Bill still viewed Steve as kind of a freak, and he was fascinated by him. You know, people would say, well, why did you let Steve treat you that way? And Bill didn't even know he was being treated a certain way. He was just watching this and saying, who is this guy? You know, how does this work? Is there an algorithm here? Because I don't get it, you know? He spent 30 years watching Steve Jobs, just trying to figure out what the fuck was going on.